Thomas Jefferson was the third president of the United States and was known for great accomplishments such as authoring the Declaration of Independence, purchasing the Louisiana Territory while president, and establishing the separation of church and state. Jefferson is often referred to as a Renaissance man and a champion of Enlightenment ideals. This is one perspective that many have of Jefferson. The contrary perspective is that Jefferson was a hypocrite, a person who proclaimed that all men are created equal while at the same time owning hundreds of slaves on his plantation at Monticello. The purpose of this video is to examine the two views that people hold of Thomas Jefferson and the evidence that supports both sides. Let's start with the supportive views. The most common point that supporters of Jefferson use is that he was the primary writer of the Declaration of Independence, a document that was so instrumental to the pursuit of freedom that it inspired countless movements of freedom from the French Revolution in the 1790s to the Latin American Wars of Independence in the 19th century. Another important point that supporters of Jefferson make is that we need to judge someone by the context of the time they lived in. For example, most wealthy Southerners in 18th century America owned slaves and practiced the despicable acts that accompanied it. Now that we know this information, we can connect it back to the focus of this argument and see that despite practicing in slavery, Jefferson's actions were the norm at the time. Now let's examine the opposing argument. Many detractors of Thomas Jefferson argue that despite it being the norm for people to own slaves while he was alive, it still does not justify his actions as they are inapprehensible from a moral standpoint. Another major fact about Thomas Jefferson that must be noted is the fact that he had an affair with one of his own slaves. Historical and biological evidence now support the claim that Thomas Jefferson fathered at least 6 kids with his slave, Sarah Hemmings. Now, it's impossible for one to understand the intentions of an individual who died hundreds of years ago. However, it must be pointed out that the birth of enslaved children oftentimes would profit the plantation owner, as it would provide for more free labor for them to use. Thomas Jefferson is an important yet controversial figure in American history. On one hand, his actions helped shape the United States to become the nation it is today. On another hand, he participated in the most deplorable institution in American history. When analyzing any major historical figure, it's important that we take into context the time period for which they lived in and the positive and negative influences they had on human civilization. From there on, we can come to a conclusion on the morality of such figures and if they should be revered or villainized.